The room was filled with laughter, the glow of candles reflecting off smiling faces as family and friends gathered to celebrate her birthday. She had just turned another year older, another step closer to fulfilling her dreams. At the center of it all was her fiancé, the man she had planned to spend the rest of her life with. Then, in front of everyone, he did something that would forever be etched into their memories. He got down on one knee. Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed as friends grabbed their phones to capture the moment. Her eyes widened in shock, her hands covering her mouth as he pulled out a ring, a symbol of their future, their love, their commitment. She said yes. The cheers, the applause, the tears of joy. It was the kind of moment many dream of, a picture-perfect love story in the making. But what no one knew, not her family, not her friends, not even she herself, was that she had just sealed her fate. Because less than 48 hours later, the same man who promised her forever would take away every tomorrow she had left. The crime scene was something out of a nightmare. Officers arrived at what should have been a home filled with love, only to find the aftermath of a brutal betrayal. What they saw would haunt them. Blood pooling on the floor, shattered furniture, the eerie silence of a house that had witnessed something unthinkable. The woman they had once seen as a dedicated police officer, a daughter, a friend, a fiancé, now lifeless. But what disturbed them even more was the man responsible. The same man who had just proposed to her, who had vowed to protect her, who had held her in his arms just days before. He was now the prime suspect. And the biggest question of all, why? How does a man go from professing love to committing murder in just 48 hours? What triggered him? Was it something planned? Or did something snap inside him? And more importantly, was this tragedy something that could have been prevented? As the truth began to unfold, it became clear. This was not just a crime of passion, but something much darker, much more twisted than anyone could have imagined. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated. Your support means the world to us, and we truly appreciate it. Thank you. Her name was Samantha Parker, a 31-year-old police officer known for her dedication, courage, and unwavering sense of justice. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Samantha had always been the one people turned to in times of trouble, whether it was for advice, support, or just a listening ear. With striking chestnut hair and a warm, approachable smile, she had the ability to make everyone around her feel seen, heard, and understood. She had been a police officer for over 5 years, a profession she had always dreamed of since childhood. After high school, Samantha enrolled in a police academy, working tirelessly to prove herself in a male-dominated field. Her work ethic and sharp instincts had earned her respect not only among her peers but also from her supervisors. She had the kind of tenacity that could turn any case, no matter how cold, into a solved mystery. She had a reputation for being brave but never reckless, always thinking ahead and keeping a calm head even in the most chaotic of situations. But beyond her badge, Samantha was a dreamer. She envisioned a future where she could use her success to help others, both through her work and by giving back to her community. She wanted a family, children, and a home filled with laughter and love. She was close with her parents and 2 younger siblings, who admired her strength and admired her for chasing her dreams. She had a close-knit group of friends, often described as the life of the party, but with a deep emotional side that she kept hidden from most. Samantha's future looked bright, with a successful career and a love that seemed to be leading her to happily ever after. Little did she know that in those last few days, her world was about to shatter. Her fiancé, Dawson, was a 35-year-old police officer with a reputation for being professional but with a certain level of emotional distance. Eric had been with the force for nearly a decade. He had seen it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but despite his experience, something about him always felt a little off. He had an easy smile, was quick to crack a joke, and often found himself in the company of others. But those who knew him closely noticed that he had an inability to truly connect with others. Eric was originally from a working-class family. He joined law enforcement in his late 20s, seeking stability and a sense of purpose that his previous jobs had failed to provide. While many saw him as a reliable cop, Those closest to him knew him as someone who struggled with his own internal battles. He met Samantha through mutual friends at a department event. The chemistry was immediate. He admired her ambition, and she appreciated his calm demeanor and supportiveness. Within a year, they became inseparable. Their relationship appeared perfect. A cop couple, working the same job, understanding the demands of their profession. They were always seen together, whether attending barbecues, charity events, or simply spending time with each other. To the outside world, they seemed like a perfect match. Two people dedicated to service each other and building a life together. However, behind closed doors, things weren't always so smooth. Their relationship, like many others, had its cracks. Eric struggled with jealousy, especially when it came to Samantha's success. He felt overshadowed by her accomplishments and was insecure about his place in the relationship. But Samantha always dismissed these small moments as stressors, nothing more than growing pains. There had been moments when Eric's temper flared, moments when he lashed out over trivial matters, or when he grew too possessive. These instances were often swept under the rug, dismissed as him having a bad day. But deep down, Samantha knew that something was off, though she chalked it up to the pressures of their shared career. Samantha's birthday was the highlight of her year. This time, however, the celebration held even more meaning. The family gathered at her parents' home in the evening, laughing and sharing stories. The air was filled with warmth, love, and excitement as Samantha's closest friends and family gathered to celebrate her turning 31. Little did they know, this birthday would be her last. As the night unfolded, Eric stood out as the man in control. He was making sure everyone had enough to eat and drink, cracking jokes, and looking at Samantha with that unmistakable gaze. At the peak of the evening, he called for attention, prompting everyone to turn their heads toward him. Samantha, caught off guard, looked at Eric, unsure of what was coming. Was this another toast? Another birthday speech? But then he did something she hadn't expected. He dropped to one knee, holding out a shiny diamond ring. He proposed right there, in front of all their friends and family. The crowd gasped, and a hush fell over the room. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. She never imagined her birthday would bring such an overwhelming moment of joy. She said yes. The applause followed, and there was a celebratory cheer as everyone toasted to their engagement. But as she looked into Eric's eyes, something felt strange. A flicker of uncertainty. Was it her imagination? She couldn't place it, but there was a shift, a subtle tension beneath the surface. Eric smiled, but it didn't seem as genuine as she thought it should be. The moment should have felt magical, yet a feeling of unease lingered in the air. Was it just the excitement of the evening? Or was something darker lurking beneath his eyes? Family and friends were ecstatic, congratulating the couple. But no one saw the silent storm brewing behind Eric's smile. No one knew that the engagement, once thought to symbolize love and a future, would soon be overshadowed by horrifying violence. In the days following the engagement, Eric was colder. Samantha, still riding the high of her proposal, noticed the shift but didn't think much of it at first. Perhaps he was just tired or stressed from his own work. But deep down, something gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that Eric wasn't the same man who had just asked her to marry him. And then, 2 days later, everything changed. The promise of forever turned into a nightmare. Samantha was found dead, and the man who had pledged to love her now stood accused of ending her life. Now, the question that haunted everyone remained. Had the engagement been real, or had something darker been at play all along? The 2 days that followed Samantha's engagement were marked by an unsettling silence. On the surface, everything appeared fine. Family and friends were still reveling in the joy of the celebration, and Samantha and Eric had even posted a picture on social media, showing off her new engagement ring with wide smiles. But behind those smiles, something was deeply wrong. After the birthday party, Samantha and Eric spent the next day together. They had planned to go out for a celebratory dinner, but Eric was distant. He seemed preoccupied, distracted, almost on edge. Samantha, wanting to give him space, chalked it up to the pressure of the engagement and his long shifts as a cop. But as the day progressed, the tension between them became palpable. There were moments when their conversations fell into silence, and Samantha couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. That evening, they went for a walk, something they often did to unwind after a long day. Samantha tried to talk about their future, the wedding plans, where they would live, how they'd raise a family. But Eric's responses were clipped, non-committal, almost as if he were there but not fully present. Samantha asked him if everything was okay. Eric responded, "Everything's fine, just tired." But the tightness in his voice suggested otherwise. The next day, things took a darker turn. Eric barely spoke to Samantha. He left for work early, without any explanation. Samantha, still trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, texted him during the day, asking if he wanted to grab lunch or meet up later. But her messages went unanswered. That was out of character for him, and her concern grew. Was it the stress of the engagement? Or something deeper? Something hidden beneath the surface? Later that evening, around 9 p.m., Samantha called her best friend, Jessica, to catch up. Jessica could hear the anxiety in Samantha's voice, but she assured her that it was just pre-wedding jitters and that everything would be fine. Eric's silence was unsettling, but Samantha didn't want to overthink it. They made plans to get together the following weekend, with Samantha mentioning that she and Eric were going to have a quiet night in. They hung up, not knowing it would be their last conversation. At 9:45 p.m., Samantha texted Eric again, asking if he was coming home soon. The message read, "Are you okay? We need to talk. I love you." She never received a reply. In the early hours of the morning, Eric returned home. The details of what transpired that night remain largely unclear, but one thing was certain: a violent confrontation occurred behind closed doors. Whatever had been festering between them finally erupted. Something snapped. The following morning, Samantha's parents became concerned. Samantha had always been reliable. She never missed a call or failed to check in. But that morning, her phone went straight to voicemail. After several attempts to reach her, they contacted the police. By 11 a.m., officers arrived at Samantha's apartment, where the situation was about to unfold in the most shocking way. Samantha's parents, who had been waiting anxiously at the door, were the first to enter the apartment. They immediately called 911 when they saw her lifeless body lying in the living room. The crime scene was chilling. Samantha's body was discovered sprawled on the floor, just a few feet from the sofa where she had last been seen alive. The apartment had been meticulously cleaned, but there were still telltale signs of a struggle. A broken lamp, the shattered glass, and a blood-stained area near the couch painted a grim picture of what had happened. The blood splatter suggested that Samantha had been attacked in a moment of rage, and her wounds were consistent with blunt force trauma, a violent and forceful assault. The most disturbing thing? Eric's absence. He was nowhere to be found. The apartment was locked from the inside, with no signs of forced entry. This meant that the killer had known the victim and had control of the situation. The first responders were immediately struck by the calmness of the scene. There was no sign of a struggle at the door, and there didn't seem to be any signs of forced entry. The apartment was eerily quiet, but there was a sense of unease in the air. The lead detective, Officer Sarah Fields, was among the first to arrive. She described the scene as eerily normal, considering the brutality of the crime. It was as though whoever did this knew they had time to cover their tracks, she later said in an interview. The victim's body was found in a state that suggested she had been taken by surprise. She was unclothed from the waist down, with signs of a struggle that indicated she fought for her life before she succumbed to her attacker's fury. But there was something more disturbing: Samantha's phone. It had been thrown across the room, still unlocked. In the last moments of her life, Samantha had been trying to reach out to someone. Perhaps her fiancé, perhaps a friend. Samantha's body showed signs of blunt force trauma, but there were no immediate signs of gunshot wounds or stabbing. Instead, her injuries suggested a violent confrontation, bruising around her neck, consistent with strangulation or a forceful grip. Her hands were scratched and bloodied, as though she had tried to push someone off or defend herself. Her face, however, was what stuck with investigators. The expression of fear frozen on her face sent a chill through the room. It was as though, in those final moments, Samantha had realized the extent of her danger, and it was too late. What was even more chilling was the attempt to cover up the crime. In the hours following the murder, Eric Dawson's behavior became suspect. He had gone missing after the murder, and his phone records indicated that he had made several unscheduled stops throughout the city, none of which had been explained. CCTV footage from a local gas station showed Eric on the night of the crime, walking to his car, looking disheveled and in a state of shock. He didn't seem to acknowledge the camera, but something about his demeanor seemed off. Later, authorities discovered that Eric had called in sick to work the next day, a rare occurrence for him, as he was known for being diligent about his shifts. The most telling piece of evidence was found in the garbage can outside of Eric's apartment, a blood-stained shirt that had been torn and discarded. It was clear that whoever committed this crime had tried to clean up the scene, but had overlooked key details. The attempts to destroy evidence only solidified suspicions that this wasn't a random act of violence. It was personal. Why did it take only 48 hours for this happy engagement to turn into an unfathomable tragedy? Was Eric hiding something darker beneath his seemingly charming exterior? And what had driven him to kill the woman he had just promised a future to? The investigation had only begun, but the answers were about to reveal a twisted truth that no one saw coming. From the moment the crime scene was discovered, Detective Sarah Fields and her team were confronted with an unsettling realization. This was no random act of violence. The scene felt too controlled, too familiar. Samantha's apartment showed no signs of forced entry, which immediately pointed to someone who knew her. In a case like this, the first person of interest is always someone close to the victim, and with Samantha's fiancé, Eric, nowhere to be found, suspicion quickly fell on him. The idea of a romantic crime of passion was soon on the table. The police knew Eric had been absent for a critical period during the hours of Samantha's death, but there were no signs of him leaving town or doing anything that could easily explain his whereabouts. His phone had gone dark during the crucial time window. This prompted further scrutiny of his relationship with Samantha. What had been the cause of their sudden strain? Was this an isolated outburst, or had there been a buildup of hidden tensions? As investigators began speaking to Samantha's family and friends, they learned more about her relationship with Eric. It became clear that while the couple had been together for several years, there had always been something unsettling beneath the surface. Those closest to Samantha recalled instances where Eric's temper had flared, though no one ever thought it would escalate to something so extreme. Eric's initial interview was telling. When the officers first questioned him, he appeared visibly shaken, but there was a disconnection in his responses. At first, he claimed to have been at work late on the night of the crime and that he hadn't spoken to Samantha since the previous evening. But when pressed, his story began to shift. He couldn't remember the exact time he'd gotten off work, nor could he explain why he hadn't tried to reach Samantha on her birthday evening, especially after she had texted him so many times. His version of events seemed rehearsed, too clean. He claimed that when he returned home, he found Samantha already dead. But the timeline didn't make sense. What time had he actually arrived? Why hadn't he noticed any unusual signs of disturbance in the apartment when he came in? Why didn't he immediately call the police when he found her? Family and friends started to share troubling details. Samantha's mother, Bev, recalled an argument between the couple just days before the engagement. Something small, but it left Samantha feeling uneasy. One of Samantha's co-workers at the precinct even mentioned that Eric had been acting strangely at work recently, withdrawn and irritable. The once joyful couple, now seemingly estranged, had been drifting apart in ways no one could have predicted. Was this a culmination of jealousy, resentment, and buried secrets? As investigators dug deeper, Eric's alibi continued to fall apart. He had told them that he was at a bar with a few colleagues after work, but none of them could definitively confirm the details of his location during the time of the murder. The next phase of the investigation focused on gathering physical and digital evidence that could either corroborate Eric's story or expose a darker truth. Blood stains in the apartment painted a disturbing picture. The blood spatter near the living room couch suggested a violent struggle, and the bloody handprint left on the doorframe appeared to be Samantha's, not Eric's. It was as if Samantha had tried to escape or defend herself. The most significant clue, however, was the weapon. A heavy decorative vase found near her body, covered in blood. Investigators suspected that Eric had likely used the vase to strike her, given its proximity and the signs of blunt force trauma found on Samantha's body. Samantha's phone records told a different story from Eric's. She had texted him multiple times on the night of the murder, asking if he was coming home soon, begging him to talk. He hadn't replied. But what stood out was the last message she had sent. "I love you." This final communication suggested that she was still trying to hold on to the relationship. But Eric's phone records painted a different picture. His phone had pinged in the area near Samantha's apartment hours before her body was discovered. Yet, Eric's phone had remained off during the crucial moments, a decision that didn't seem accidental. It wasn't until investigators obtained footage from nearby security cameras that the full extent of Eric's actions began to come to light. Video footage showed Eric's car pulling up to Samantha's apartment complex just a few hours before the murder was discovered. He entered the building with a bag in hand, which was suspicious, as it didn't match the story he had told of returning home late from work. The video footage also revealed a brief exchange with a neighbor, a moment that seemed oddly casual given the circumstances. The neighbor later admitted to seeing Eric leave the building in a hurry the next morning, without any sign of distress. No calls to the police. No signs of shock. Interviews with Samantha's family painted a picture of a woman who had become increasingly uneasy with her relationship in the days leading up to her death. Several friends mentioned how Eric's jealousy seemed to grow as Samantha's career advanced, and how they had discussed the possibility of moving to a quieter area, away from the tension of their city lives. Those who knew her best described Samantha as smart, ambitious, and loving, but also deeply loyal. Perhaps too loyal, unwilling to see the red flags that had been there all along. Just when it seemed like the case would spiral into a cold investigation with no clear answers, Detective Fields uncovered something chilling, something that would change the entire direction of the case. While going through Eric's personal emails, investigators discovered an encrypted message from an unknown contact, someone he had been in touch with for several months. The messages were coded, but their tone was unmistakable. The sender spoke of plans gone wrong, and regret over things getting out of hand. Then, a break came when Eric's old colleague came forward. This former coworker, who had known Eric for years, admitted to having had a few private conversations with Eric that seemed out of place. Eric had confided in him about his mounting frustrations with Samantha's growing independence, and how he felt as though he was losing control over her. The former coworker reported that Eric had mentioned, "If she doesn't follow my rules, I'll make sure she doesn't walk away." This revelation gave the detectives their final piece of the puzzle. With the encrypted messages and the dark confessions from Eric's past, it was clear. This wasn't a crime of passion gone wrong. It was a premeditated act of control and anger. As the pieces began to fall into place, Eric Dawson was arrested. The charges: murder, evidence tampering, and unlawful use of a weapon. What started as a seemingly tragic case of a fiancé going too far had unraveled into something far more sinister. A story of abuse, control, and deep-seated jealousy, culminating in a tragedy no one could have anticipated. The arrest sent shockwaves through the local community. But for Samantha's family and friends, the heartbreak was just beginning. In the days following Eric's arrest, the question everyone wanted answered was why. Was this a crime of passion, a snap decision in the heat of an argument, or was it something far darker? A calculated act of murder, carefully planned and executed with cold precision? The initial investigation pointed to a crime of passion. A jealous fiancé, angry over some perceived slight, lashing out in a moment of heated emotion. But as the evidence mounted, it became clear that Eric had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone had suspected. It wasn't just a random explosion of rage. It was methodical. Eric's history, when dug into, revealed a pattern of possessive behavior that was troubling, to say the least. Friends and family spoke of how Eric had always struggled with control in his relationships, particularly with Samantha. He had a deep-seated fear of losing her, a fear that grew more intense as Samantha began to advance in her career. As her professional life flourished, her personal life with Eric began to show cracks. His jealousy grew as she gained more recognition, and the dynamics of their relationship shifted. Eric, who was employed as a project manager at a local construction firm, seemed to grow increasingly resentful of Samantha's independence. She had always been strong-willed, ambitious, and fiercely loyal to her career, but Eric wanted more. He wanted her to need him in ways that went beyond love, to depend on him financially, emotionally, and professionally. Samantha's increasing self-sufficiency threatened his need for control, and the more she advanced in her life, the more Eric seemed to retreat into a dark space of resentment. This, it seemed, had been building for months, possibly even years. Friends and co-workers recalled how, in the weeks leading up to the murder, Eric had been increasingly isolated, his mood swinging from angry outbursts to periods of deep withdrawal. Had it been a slow burn, with Eric's growing frustration finally reaching a breaking point? Or had he calculated every step, knowing exactly how to manipulate the situation until Samantha was trapped in a relationship that suffocated her? One of the most revealing pieces of the investigation was the discovery of a diary Samantha had kept hidden. In it, she described the mounting pressure she felt from Eric's controlling behavior, how he had started questioning every aspect of her life, from the friends she hung out with to the decisions she made at work. She wrote about feeling trapped, like she couldn't breathe without upsetting him. The more she tried to assert her independence, the more Eric sought ways to bring her back under his thumb. There was, however, one major detail that took everyone by surprise: a financial motive. As detectives dug into the couple's finances, they discovered that Eric had been secretly drowning in debt. Credit card bills, loans, and gambling debts had all been accumulating under his name. Samantha had recently learned about these financial issues, and while she wasn't fully aware of the extent of the damage, she had expressed to a close friend that she was considering ending the engagement. Her potential decision to leave him would have meant a total loss of financial support for Eric, as she had been the primary breadwinner in their household. His entire lifestyle was dependent on her income and stability. For Eric, this was the final straw. His fear of losing control, both emotionally and financially, collided in a moment of rage and desperation. It wasn't just about love, it was about survival in his eyes. If he couldn't have her, then no one would. Psychological experts who reviewed the case painted a chilling picture of Eric's mental state. Dr. Linda Grayson, a forensic psychologist who was brought in to analyze Eric's behavior, suggested that Eric displayed all the signs of a manipulative narcissist, someone who had an overwhelming need to control the people around him, especially those he loved. According to Dr. Grayson, Eric had likely been grooming Samantha for years, cultivating her sense of dependence on him while slowly undermining her self-confidence and autonomy. He had, in a sense, created a relationship where leaving him seemed impossible. What was more unsettling, however, was the escalation of Eric's behavior. Dr. Grayson noted that while Eric had never been physically violent before, his anger and emotional manipulation had been building over time. There had been previous incidents, subtle but disturbing, where he had isolated Samantha from her friends and made her feel guilty for spending time away from him. These incidents, though small, created an environment where violence was never far off. The day of the murder, she argued, was the final manifestation of a growing pattern of control and violence. One crucial piece of evidence that came to light in the investigation was a series of texts and emails Eric had sent Samantha in the days leading up to her death. In them, he demanded that she choose between him and her career. He wanted her to step back, to stop focusing on her advancement in law enforcement, and to make her real priorities clear. This psychological pressure, combined with Eric's mounting financial pressure, seems to have led to an explosive breakdown. Friends and family perspectives. Samantha's loved ones were devastated by the revelations about her relationship with Eric. Her best friend, Rachel, struggled to believe that the man she had once called her friend could be capable of such an act. "He was always the charming, easygoing guy," Rachel said during her interview. "He had us all fooled, especially Samantha. I don't think any of us realized just how manipulative he really was. She was so caught up in trying to make things work, she didn't see how much he was changing." Samantha's mother, Bev, had always been wary of Eric, though she never thought he would go this far. "I saw how he could be controlling," she admitted. There were always little things. He didn't like when she went out with her friends. He didn't like when she worked late. But I never imagined he would hurt her. Despite these concerns, no one had seen the full extent of the danger lurking beneath the surface. There had been small arguments, moments where Samantha confided in her loved ones that Eric seemed more distant and unpredictable. But no one had suspected that his control would escalate to the point of murder. The tragic reality was that no one saw the warning signs clearly enough to intervene, and by the time they did, it was too late. The investigation revealed that Eric's controlling nature had been quietly suffocating Samantha for years. Her inability to recognize the full extent of his manipulation was part of what led to her eventual demise. For Eric, this wasn't just a tragic event. It was the culmination of a calculated plan that had been years in the making. As the investigation progressed, unanswered questions began to hang in the air. Why had Eric gone to such lengths to hide his financial troubles? Why had he maintained such a seemingly perfect facade for so long, only to reveal his true nature in the end? Was there anyone else involved in his actions? Or was this all his doing? The answers to these questions lay buried deep within Eric's psyche, and while he had been arrested and charged with murder, it was clear that the full extent of his motives might never be fully understood. What was certain, however, was that Samantha's death had not been a single, spontaneous act of violence. It was the final, deadly result of a twisted dance of control, manipulation, and desperation. An escalation of behaviors that had festered for too long, eventually culminating in one of the most tragic crimes the city had ever seen. The police arrested Eric at his home, catching him off guard during an early morning raid. Initially, he remained calm, but as the officers read him his rights, the reality of the situation sank in. He denied any involvement in Samantha's death, insisting it was a tragic accident. His defiance, however, couldn't cover up the mounting evidence against him. Eric was charged with first-degree murder after a thorough investigation revealed his premeditated actions. In the courtroom, the prosecution presented damning physical and digital evidence. His fingerprints on the weapon, texts showing manipulative behavior, and testimonies from those who witnessed his escalating control over Samantha. The defense tried to argue that it was a crime of passion, but the overwhelming evidence led the jury to reject the plea for a lesser charge. The trial proceeded, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Eric was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Samantha's family, though relieved by the conviction, were left with a sense of emptiness. Justice could never bring her back. The grief lingered, but there was a sense of closure, knowing that Eric would no longer be able to manipulate or hurt anyone again. This tragedy raises the question: could it have been prevented? Many of Samantha's friends and family later revealed they had noticed subtle red flags: Eric's possessive nature, his controlling behavior, and the gradual isolation he imposed on her. These warning signs, often dismissed or overlooked, were clear indicators of domestic abuse. Unfortunately, they only became apparent after the devastating event. This case serves as a stark reminder that early intervention can save lives. The case shocked the local community, leaving a lasting impact on both law enforcement and the public. Officers were left questioning how such a close-knit, seemingly perfect couple could hide such dark secrets. As the investigation unfolded, the tragedy sparked conversations about domestic violence in the community, leading to policy changes in law enforcement training and new awareness programs aimed at identifying and intervening in abusive relationships before they escalate. To prevent future tragedies like this, it's crucial to speak out. If you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, reach out for support. Many helplines are available for domestic abuse survivors, offering guidance and a safe space for those in need. Starting open conversations about relationship red flags and emotional manipulation can help others recognize the signs and protect themselves from harm. As we reflect on this heartbreaking case, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think justice was truly served for Samantha? Or could there have been a different outcome if warning signs were acted upon earlier? Have you ever seen warning signs in a relationship that others ignored? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going and raise awareness together. If you found this case as gripping and thought-provoking as I did, Be sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Hit the notification bell so you never miss out on the latest true crime cases and important conversations. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and share. Your support helps keep these stories alive and raises awareness. Thank you for watching, and stay safe.